Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me today and taking the time to attend today's training session. My name is Dusty Humphreys, and I manage the Affordable Housing Program, also known as AHP. I have been in the Housing and Community Development Department for about 13 years now, and I oversee the scoring and review process for the AHP competitive round. And I work with our team to ensure that applications align with program requirements and regulations. So today I'll be walking through the AHP scoring criteria and sharing insights that can help strengthen your application and also strengthen the materials that you're providing to us for review. I want to ensure that you have an understanding of the basic requirements, the expectations of the documentation, and then also compliance considerations for later on in your projects if you are awarded for each of the scoring criteria. So a few housekeeping items for today. Very similar to what we did last week, we've carved out about an hour for this session, but we're hoping it may not take the entire time. And I'm really hoping it doesn't go over. I will also allow time at the end of the webinar to answer questions. So if you have any scoring questions, either now or throughout the webinar, go ahead and put that in the chat or Q&A option, and we can answer those questions at the end of the webinar. If we don't address your question, it may be that it's project specific. We're going to provide feedback then to you via email. Today's webinar training is for general scoring questions, not necessarily project specific questions. So the webinar is recorded, and you will be able to reference it. It will be uploaded to the website, so you can go back to it at any time that you need to. So now that we've covered scoring or housekeeping items, I do want to go over some very important items regarding the scoring criteria itself and point determination. So regulation requires that Federal Home Loan Bank allocate 100 points to scoring criteria that's listed in the application. And while I will be reviewing the scoring criteria today, the AHP implementation plan that's available on our website is the governing policy document, and that is where all of the scoring criteria is listed and defined. Scores within an application can be adjusted by our housing and community development analysts, and final points are awarded and determined by those analysts. So you must present the required documentation to receive points. If you do not present the required documentation, then those points will be removed from your application. Now, having said that, we can also not add points to your application. Scoring criteria is only reviewed if you selected them and say that, yes, you will be attempting to gain these points. We do not review criteria to see if you should have selected them or you might be eligible for them. So applications are awarded applications are awarded a subsidy based on the highest scoring application, and then we go in a descending order until all the funds are exhausted. So with that foundation in mind, now we're going to take a look at a brief section of the public website. So this is one of the headers that's within the application section of our website. And if you have not gone out there yet, I would highly suggest you go out there. There's a lot more information and tools available to you for you to use as you prepare for the application. And we really do highly suggest that you utilize these tools. So quickly, I'm going to bring up, you'll see on that list it's about the fourth or fifth one down, the scoring, self-score determination tool. This is new this year. Let me bring that over. So this is a document that was created to assist you with completing a self-score before the application opens. It does list all of the scoring criteria, even the ones that your particular application may not qualify for. So be careful when you're entering what you think that your points might be, that you are entering just the ones that your particular application may get. So you'll want to enter the score for the criteria that you think that you might apply for in the application. And this will also then help you when the application round opens to know maybe to kind of double check what you are applying for in the application, what you've said yes to, and then what is the commitments that is listed here on this spreadsheet. Please note, we will not be reviewing this tool for any specific project. So this is not for you to send to us to double check to see if your project does qualify for the points. We are no longer doing that type of technical assistance. This is really just a tool for you to utilize to make sure that you've hit all of the different point criteria that your particular application may be eligible for. So we also have on this website, we have other guides that will help with determining qualifications for points or eligibility for points. So we have a list, spreadsheet that includes eligible counties for rural, district distribution. We also have a determination guide for federally declared disaster area, residential economic diverse census tracts, as well as qualified census tracts and difficult to develop areas. So these guides will quickly walk you through how to determine if your project is possibly eligible to gain points for these criteria. So ultimately, what I'm covering today is available in many other resources, such as the AHP implementation plan, as well as the application user guide. So you can always use those documents as well as referring back to this recorded training session anytime that you need to. So anytime I talk about acceptable documentation, I might mention a memorandum of understanding. There is a template on our website. It's in the AHP application forms section. So again, that's on the application section of our website. So no matter what you do, always go to the application portion of our website, and this is where you will find all the references and forms that you need to for the application. You should never have to navigate anywhere else on our website to get any kind of resource or form that I'm talking about today. So the memorandum of understanding does have all the required information on it. So having said that, though, if you decide not to use the memorandum of understanding, you still will have to provide all of the required bullet pointed items that are listed on the memorandum of understanding. You can provide a commitment letter, but just know that commitment letter has to be on letterhead, and it has to be signed and dated, and it has to meet all of the bullet pointed items that are listed on the memorandum of understanding. So everything that I've kind of talked about, it's really just easier if you provide that MOU to us. Also, please remember that the MOU also has to be signed and dated. It can be signed and dated within this year or the previous calendar year. Now, we've had some questions about the MOU itself, how to get it to work properly. It is formulated or formatted as such that you have to complete the first 4 lines within the MOU before the scoring commitments will show up. So again, please check out that pre-recorded video. It will be uploaded probably within the next week or so. That kind of helps you walk through that MOU. And then lastly, for projects that are awarded, we want to make sure that the documentation that you agree to is in a central location within your office for any employees to use, or make sure everybody gets copies of this documentation. Over the years, let's say you're a rental project, you are talking to us for almost 20 years. If you are a rental project. And over those years, there will be turnover. And it's key that throughout those years that you're, talking to us for compliance, that everyone understands the scoring commitments that your project is going to be held to. And while project completion is generally the last time that we will check on scoring commitments, Federal Home Loan Bank does reserve the right to ask for documentation at any time within the retention period. So make sure that there is either like a physical binder or a folder on a shared computer drive that's labeled AHP funding, and you can ensure all the important documentation is within that binder or folder that people might need throughout the years. Okay, so enough with the general information. We're going to get down to business, and we're going to start talking about the scoring commitments in depth. We are going in order of the implementation plan. So the first commitment that we're going to talk about is donated property. To be considered donated land, units, or buildings, they must be fully donated at no cost or a de minimis cost. So that statement right there already brings up questions, right? So they must be donated to the project. So what does the project mean? So for a rental project, that means the donations must be made to the sponsor or the ownership entity. And for home ownership projects, that means that the donation must be to the sponsor. What does fully donated means? It means that the sales price, basically, there cannot be a reduced sales price, right? It's fully donated. There's no cost to you at all for this land, units, buildings, etc. And then what does de minimis mean? We do define de minimis in our AHP implementation plan, but it means $100 or less, excluding typical closing costs, transfer costs, etc., or a leased amount of $100 or less per year. So donations made by the project sponsor, owner, developer, or any affiliates thereof are not eligible to receive donated property points unless it was first donated to them. And then lastly, any applications that include rehabilitation without any type of acquisition are not eligible to receive points. So let's specifically talk about the points that you may garner in an application for donated property. So to receive points, at least 20% of the land, units, or buildings must be donated. And the number of points depends on the timeline of the donation. So if the donation was made by a federal government, 5 points can be awarded no matter the timeline of the donation. Excuse me. Let me say that again, since I was fumbling over myself. If the donation was made by the federal government, 5 points can be awarded no matter the timeline of the donation. If the donation was made by any other organization or entity, 5 points can be awarded if the donation was made within 5 years of the application deadline. If it's outside of 5 years, then 2.5 points can be awarded. For home ownership applications, please take note here. Points are awarded based on documentation submitted at the time of application, which means you already have to have donations. This indicates to us that your organization has the ability to receive donated property. Now, having said that, your projects if you are awarded, will be allowed to change locations if necessary. So what does that really mean? If you receive 5 points in the application, then that means that all of the properties or land were donated to you within 5 years. So that means that you can use either a newer donation or you can switch addresses provided that it's within the same time period. So switching gears a little bit, let's talk about what's acceptable documentation. So of course, this is not an all-inclusive list. These are just some of the most common documents that we see: a donation commitment letter, a settlement statement or closing disclosure showing zero cost, a real estate transfer statement showing that the transfer was a gift, a purchase contract showing zero cost, or possibly a long-term lease showing zero cost. Now, having said zero cost 3 different times there, or a de minimis cost, right? The $100 or less. Documentation that is not acceptable of any kind are deeds. Everybody wants to give me a deed that says, that $10 or less. That is just a typical deed template. That does not show ownership. I'm sorry, deeds show ownership, not the actual cost of the property. So that's why deeds are not acceptable. Also, as a side note, I did cover this in last week's webinar, but you can have a subject to donation letter or lease that's completely acceptable. So that means it can be contingent on receiving AHP funds, but any kind of documentation must be valid throughout the award announcement date that's in December. Okay, so next I'm going to go over sponsorship by a not-for-profit organization or government entity. So this scoring criteria is very different from rental applications versus home ownership applications. And what I'm going to cover on this slide is specifically for rental applications. So to receive points for this one, it is all about the percentage of interest in the ownership entity. So the organization who applies and basically is listed as the sponsor in the application must have ownership interest in the ownership entity, or the GP or the LP or the managing partner. You are not required to be a nonprofit, native, or government sponsor to apply for AHP funds, but you must have that regulatory requirement of 10%. And if you do have that regulatory requirement of 10% and you're a nonprofit, native, or governmental sponsor, then you will receive 1 point in the application. To receive 2 points in the application, you must be a nonprofit or government entity that has greater than 50% ownership interest. And to receive 5 points in the application, you must be a federally recognized Native American tribe, tribally designated housing entity, Alaskan Native villages, or government entity for the Native Hawaiian homelands. So acceptable documentation for this scoring criteria depends on the type of sponsor organization you are. So if you're a nonprofit, then you will have an IRS determination letter. And then we also need you to provide the certificate of good standing. So this is a document that you will get from the Secretary of State's office for the state that you're located in. And remember that the certificate of good standing must be dated within the current application year. So we will only accept certifications from 2026. For a governmental entity such as a housing authority or city agency, you can provide a charter or enabling legislation. You can also provide a signed and dated letter indicating your organization has permission to apply for funding. And this letter can be signed from a city manager, mayor, or similar entity. For native sponsors, again, the documentation depends on the type of native sponsor you are. So you can provide a printout of recognition from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. You can provide documentation from HUD showing that you are a tribally designated housing entity, or a letter from the Department of Hawaiian Homelands allowing you to apply for federal home loan bank funding. So next, we're going to go over and switch to home ownership applications. Again, this is completely different than rental. For home ownership applications, the sponsor organization must include integral involvement in the project. And if you meet this requirement and you are a nonprofit or government agency, then you will receive 2.5 points in the application. If you are a native sponsor, which is the Native American tribe, tribally designated housing entity, Alaskan Native village, or government entity for the Native Hawaiian homelands, then you will receive 5 points in the application. So what does integral involvement mean? This means you have 3 options and you only have to select one out of the 3. You have to manage the construction or rehabilitation of the properties. You have to provide empowerment services directly to the home buyers or homeowners, or you can qualify the borrower or provide for financing for the home buyers. So let me back up a little bit. Providing empowerment services means that you are the direct provider of the service for creating the economic opportunity scoring section that we're going to walk through here in just a little bit. Acceptable documentation for homeownership applications is exactly the same as rental applications. There is nothing different between the two. I'm going to go ahead and walk over it again, though, just so that you don't have to rewind if you're listening to a recorded version of this training. For nonprofit organizations, we want a copy of the IRS determination letter and a certificate of good standing. That certificate of good standing must be dated within 2026. For a government entity or housing authority, city agency, you're going to provide the charter or enabling legislation. You can also provide a signed and dated letter giving permission for your organization to apply for funding from the city manager, mayor, or some other type of similar entity. And then for native sponsors, you're going to provide recognition from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, documentation from HUD showing that you're a tribally designated housing entity, or a letter from the Department of Hawaiian Homelands that it's acceptable for you to apply for AHP funding. Excuse me. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit again, and I'm going to go to the next commitment. And this is specifically for homeownership applications. If you are working with homebuyers and you would like to provide down payment assistance, then this criteria is specifically for you. There's nothing that you need to provide within the application. You just need to select yes, that you want to do this commitment. And if you are going to be working specifically with home buyers to provide down payment assistance, you will get 5 points in the application. Okay, now I'm moving on to income targeting. This is a very, very large point criterion within the application. There are 20 points available. Currently, we use USDA income limits. And some of you might be saying to yourselves, well, my project uses HUD income limits. And honestly, from our perspective, that doesn't influence the need to qualify households using our income limits and our income calculation. So please be aware that if you are awarded, even though you may be monitored by HUD, you will have to use our income calculation and our income limits. So basically, you would want to review the HUD and USDA income limits and determine which is most restrictive for your county, and then use that to qualify your households. What I tell people when they hear about this and they kind of they don't know how they're going to go about doing that, what I tell them, some advice is make 2 different folders for every household. So one is going to have the income documentation that HUD wants and their calculation, and then you're going to have maybe a different folder for the same household that is income documentation and calculation for when AHP funding. So please note an important, probably the most important part of this slide that a lot of people are unaware of is if your project has at least 60% of the units reserved for households that make less than or equal to 50% of the AMI, then you will receive all 20 points in the application. So I'm going to say that again for those of you that might be taking notes. If you have at least 60% of the units reserved for households that make less than or equal to 50% of the area median income, then you will receive all 20 points in the application. If you don't meet that requirement, then you're going to use the formula that I've also listed here on the slide. Of course, that formula is also available in the AHP implementation plan, and it is also included in that self-score determination tool. So I've given an example of how to use the formula, and I'm going to kind of go over that formula now, that example. Please note that when the formula says percent, it really wants you to enter percent. It does not want you to enter number of units within the formula. It wants you to enter a percent. So you'll take each percentage times the weighted number and then add that together, and that's the score that you will get in the application. So with the example here on this slide, the weighted number is 20 for units that are less than or equal to 50%. So you'll take 20 times 30% in this example. You'll take 18 times 30% in this example, and 16 times 40% in this example. So the points that you will get in this particular example is 17.8. I also have some notes here specifically for rental projects. The income targeting commitments established with other funding sources must either match or be more restrictive than what you're selecting in the AHP application. An example of this would be LIHTC funding. We will review LIHTC applications, and we will want to make sure that it matches our application. For projects that are occupied at the time of the AHP application is submitted, the income targeting for your current rent roll, the income targeting that you put in the application must match your current rent roll. The only exception to this is if you provide an acceptable relocation plan that is approved. So if you are occupied, it's required that you provide us your current rent roll with household incomes and their rent amount. We're going to look at those household incomes that you put on that document, and we want to make sure that that targeting matches in the application. And then lastly, if you have manager units cannot receive AHP funding unless the income and rent is restricted according to the income targeting that you put here in the application. If it's not restricted, then we consider those units the same as market rate units. So this section of the scoring commitments, underserved communities and populations, is all about the demographics of the households that you're working with. And it's also scored a little bit different than other categories. So this can be confusing to some of the people who are kind of looking at this. Basically, what we did was we are giving you the opportunity to decide the percentage requirement that you want to agree to. So you'll see there that points are awarded based on a specific percentage requirement. And while there are 15 points possible for this entire section, 10 of those points can come specifically from other targeted populations. So you cannot go over 10 points if you're just doing commitments in that section. To receive 15 points, you have to include some of the other sections, some of the other subcategories. So I'm going to start going over each one of these in a little bit of detail. The housing for homeless, this is a regulated scoring criteria, and the definition is based on the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. So please read that. It's listed in the AHP implementation plan in its entirety. I'm not going to go over that right now because it's pretty long. So make sure that you're reading the definition that's included in the implementation plan. This commitment is a little bit different than overnight shelters because it does require at least a 6-month occupancy option. So it's more like what we consider a transitional shelter because you do have to have that minimum 6 months requirement. So moving on to special needs. I have listed the different options available here on this slide. Please note that for this specific commitment, just this specific one, you can mix and match those different kind of subcategories to come up with the percentage that you want to commit to. So for an example, if you are doing a 50% commitment, you can say, okay, well, 10% of that's going to come from elderly, 10% with disabilities, and so on. So you can mix and match to come up with the percentage requirement. However, having said that, you cannot count a household twice if they meet two different demographics. So as an example, if you have a household with an elderly person and that elderly person is disabled, or even if someone else in the house is disabled, if they're part of the same household, you cannot count that twice for reporting purposes. You can only count one household with one special needs population. So there are quite a few subcategories in the other targeted population scoring criteria. Large units is pretty straightforward. The definition for this is you are working with at least 3-bedroom units. Now, please note again on this, you can include non-conforming bedrooms, such as a bedroom in a basement with no egress window, or even a bedroom in an attic space. Native American households means that you are working with household members that can validate they are enrolled in a member of a tribe. So they'll have an enrollment card, or they will have a certificate of degree of Indian blood card. Rural households means that they are located in a rural area as defined by USDA. Please note here, we do not define this. This is a USDA definition, and it's called the RUC code, Rural Urban Continuum Code, and you have to have a code of 4 through 9. So anything that's less than 4 is not considered rural. With this commitment, we do have a spreadsheet available on our public website that lists the eligible counties. And then for other targeted populations, we have veteran or active duty military households. We did add active duty military recently, so this is a little bit of a change. They will have to have, not at the time of application, but later on, they will have to provide proof of their current military service, or if they are a veteran, they will have a discharge status. We can work with pretty much any of the discharge statuses except for 2, and that's other than honorable discharge, or other than honorable discharge or bad conduct. We will not work with either one of those. Our last commitment in this particular section is specifically for rental households. So this is a commitment to reserve units to households that make less than or equal to 30% of the area median income. Now, this is different than your income targeting commitment. Please note that we will be checking the income targeting section of the application to validate that you've listed below 30% units there. So overall, in this section, documentation is not required. Yay! I hear fireworks in the background. No documentation requirement. We accept the answers and percentages that you enter on the screen. But again, we will be validating these commitments later on in the life cycle of your project if you are awarded. For homeownership projects, we will be validating these commitments with each disbursement request that you submit. For rental projects, we will be validating this at project completion. So this is a great time to kind of note that these commitments must be units that are reserved. So you have to actually reserve the units, and that means that you must wait and only move forward with helping a household or allowing them to move into your property unless they meet these commitments. So for rental projects, that means that you may have to hold a unit vacant. And you will have to make sure that any other funding source that you work with is okay with holding a unit vacant as you're trying to lease your property up to meet your specific percentage requirement. And again, these percentage requirements are up to you. We are not forcing you to do a specific percentage requirement. So just please make sure that any funding source that you work with has the same understanding that you must be reserving these units. For homeownership projects, that means that there's a possibility of getting out of compliance with your scoring commitments as it compares to the number of units that you've submitted for reimbursement. So we would ask then that you slow down on your disbursements and you're specifically working to find and fulfill units that will have specific scoring criteria. If you don't stay on track with your scoring commitments, we will make you. So that means that your project might be put on disbursement hold unless that particular unit is meeting the commitments that you're behind. So if you have market rate or unrestricted manager units, please note that these commitments, these percentages are also based on the total number of units, not just the AHP assisted units. So next, now that we've gone over commitments in regard to different demographics, we're going to be working with, we're going to start talking about what you're going to do to empower those households. So that's why this section has a subheader called Promotion of Empowerment. Now, I'm not going to go over each one of these subcategories, mainly because they're pretty straightforward. The definitions are listed in the implementation plan as well as the user guide. And then as a note, they're also listed in the MOU. So the MOU, as soon as you select one of these commitments, it will bring up the definition for that commitment. So that's another reason why it's best to use our MOU. A few things I do want to mention here. Make sure that what you're applying for makes sense for your project. If you are doing a down payment assistance application, it might be hard, if not impossible, to offer childcare. So just make sure that they make sense for what you're doing. Also, there is a misconception that you, as the sponsor, have to be providing these services. You can absolutely work with organizations in your community that provide these types of services. In essence, the sponsor does not have to be the provider, but the opposite can also be true. The sponsor is allowed to be the provider. It's up to you. We leave that up to you. What services and programs does your organization already provide? If they don't provide any of these services, make sure to look outside of your organization. The provider listed in the MOU should be the actual provider of the service, not necessarily a third-party organization who might be coordinating the services. That's not what we're looking for on the MOU. The MOU, we're looking for the provider, the actual provider of the service. So each one of these commitments has their own specific percentage requirement. So this is one where we don't give you a choice. We have actual percentage requirements. So if it's listed as 100% of the units, this means that you must make that commitment available, kind of also known as just offering the service or program to the households. So there's not necessarily a minimum completion requirement, but instead we just want the households to know what services or programs are available to them in their community. If there is a minimum percentage required, then that means that percentage is the number of units required to complete the commitment. So we might require signatures or certificates or something like that. There's multiple different ways that you can show later on that this commitment was fulfilled. So for this particular scoring criteria, what's acceptable documentation? Again, the easiest way to fulfill this acceptable documentation is to provide that memorandum of understanding. Again, some tips on completing that MOU. The top portion has to be completed before you can select the scoring commitment. There are different options for scoring commitments based on the drop downs that you complete. So if you're a homeownership application versus a rental application, different commitments might be popped up. So make sure that you complete those first 4 sections. And then once you select the commitment, the definition will be provided, as well as all of the required items that we want you to address. So each of the required items is a bullet pointed item. So this means you need to address them within the description that you give to us on the MOU. So again, each commitment requires a description of the curriculum or program. Please make sure please make sure what you're planning on doing is actually meeting our definition. So our definition trumps any other definition out there. So make sure to read through that definition when you're writing out the description of the commitment. And then lastly, make sure to sign and date the MOU. Again, this kind of goes back to the sponsor and the service provider. If you as the sponsor are the service provider, you only need to sign that MOU once. It might, even if you've filled it out where it looks like you need to sign it twice, you just need to sign it once. If you are working with an outside entity to provide some of these services, you will both have to sign and date the MOU. So what that means is the maximum amount of commitments that you can go for on this section is 4 different commitments. So 2.5 points each for a maximum of 10. So you might have 4 different MOUs that you are providing to us. Again, watch the pre-recorded video if you need any other assistance on completing the MOU. Ooh, went too fast there. Okay. So the next section is community stability. And as you might expect, part of the regulation within our scoring commitments allows for points within community stability. So basically, this means you're going to take what's already there and make it better. So I'm going to leave the hardest commitment for the last one that I go over, and I'm going to start with some of the easier ones. So we have owner-occupied rehabilitation. That's where I'm going to start. You'll receive 5 points for completing rehabilitation for households that are already owned. The minimum amount of rehabilitation must be at least $3,500, and that's outside of any kind of counseling fees or sponsor fees that you might be charging. There's also different kinds of acceptable rehabilitation. I'm going to go over just a few here. Acceptable kinds of rehabilitation are accessibility upgrades, roofs, electrical, plumbing, sewer, any mechanical issues, foundational, structural issues, windows, doors, flooring covers, wall repair, paint, hazardous material remediation. Basically, the list kind of can go on and on. What's not acceptable are repairs to outbuildings. We will do garages, but we are not doing any other kind of outbuildings. We are not going to pay for yard work. We are not also going to pay for any cleaning expenses, and that's cleaning inside or outside. Any landscaping, we're not going to pay for that. Hot tubs, swimming pools, anything else that might be considered luxury items. Documentation is not required for this scoring commitment on this particular screen. So if you're in the scoring section of your application, this one only requires a yes or no answer. However, you will be required to upload estimates from contractors on the feasibility rehabilitation screen. Adaptive reuse is the next commitment that I want to go over. And I just want to say this is probably the least utilized scoring commitment out there, but what I feel is one of the most important ones because of the amount of vacant properties that we have in the United States that could be utilized for for housing purposes. So if you are an organization that has taken a building that was not considered a housing use and you're changing it to housing, you will receive 5 points in your application. So an example of this would be maybe converting an old hospital into condos, and maybe those condos are for sale. Or maybe you're rehabilitating an old school into an apartment complex, and those apartments are now going to be for rent. We've even had a church that was upgraded to be used for housing, and even an old brewery that had shut down that was used for housing. So it's really amazing the number or the different types of building structures that can then be converted over to housing. Acceptable documentation for this particular commitment is it can be as easy as a printout from a tax assessor's website showing what the prior use was, or maybe a market study. We can even use a newspaper article if it confirms the address and what the old use for that building used to be. So what I think is the hardest commitment to kind of go over in this section is preservation of federally assisted housing. Now, please note this commitment is for rental projects only. If you are currently receiving federal assistance and you are going to lose that federal assistance within 2 years of the application deadline, then you can receive points. So this commitment allows for if you are rehabilitating units, and then as of 2026, we have also added the option of if you are buying or acquiring units that will be lost to market rate. So what that means is, if you're losing a HAP contract, or you're opting out of a HAP contract, or if a federal loan is going to be paid off, any kind of federal funding, LIHTC. If you're within 2 years of the expiration date of that LIHTC, then you can receive points in the application. And then, of course, the easiest way to receive points is if you are owned by a public housing authority, if you are a native sponsor organization, and you own the property that you are requesting AHP funding for, there's nothing else that you have to do. You just have to be an owner of that property. Then you will receive 5 points in the application. So acceptable documentation for this commitment can vary greatly. So we don't have any specific documentation that I'm going to cover today. It's very gray for a reason, because the varying scope of documentation we might get is too much to go over. There's just no possibility of listing acceptable documentation for this particular commitment. So reach out to us if you have any questions about that, and we can definitely go over that. Now, we are about 10 minutes away from the end of this webinar, and we still have one very large scoring criteria to go over. So I'm going to try to go over that pretty quickly. This is a Federal Home Loan Bank priority scoring commitment, and these are the ones that we've developed in partnership with our board of directors and our advisory council. So we have subsidy per unit. The subsidy per unit range, and that is just for AHP assisted units, is $15,000 to $75,000. The maximum score that you can get is 5 points, and that's regardless of if the subsidy is equal to or less than $15,000. The formula is included here on this slide, and then I've also given you an example. So basically, the subsidy per unit, you enter that where X is in the formula. And then when you do that calculation, the example here, you get 4.25 points for a subsidy per unit of $24,000. So member financial participation is the next scoring commitment, and you have 5 points available for this one. For homeownership applications, the minimum requirement is 20% of the units. We want a member to loan or donate money towards each unit. Excuse me. They can be the lender on the mortgage, or maybe buy the mortgage on the secondary market. They can contribute to a funding pool, or even maybe provide a line of credit to the sponsor. For rental applications, the minimum requirement is 25% of the AHP amount that you are awarded, and we typically see this in the form of a construction or permanent loan. For climate resiliency, I have listed each option on the slide, but I'm not going to go over the definition of each one. These are defined in the implementation plan, and they are defined specifically under the name climate resiliency and sustainability. So don't go looking for these in alphabetical order. They are specifically going to be defined under climate resiliency. Each one of these options is worth 1 point for a maximum of 5. And I think what most people want to get out of today is the acceptable documentation, and I'm going to go over that in just 1 second. What I want to be ensure that I get across today is that each criteria selected is a minimum of 50%. So let's say you're a homeownership application and you selected weatherization, then 50% of the units must have weatherization items. Additionally, if you've selected low flow plumbing fixtures, then again, 50% of the units must have low flow plumbing fixtures. And then if you've selected federally declared disaster area, 50% of the units must meet that criteria. So this criteria is not a mix and match situation. This is each specific criteria by themselves must meet the 50% requirement. So let's go over acceptable documentation. For rental projects, this is going to be a letter from your contractor stating what commitments will be included. So for items like renewable energy sources, we might need additional detail on how the commitment is going to meet the 50% requirement. So not only does the contractor say that, yes, that's going to be included, but also how is it going to meet that minimum 50% requirement? The exception to this rule for rental projects is federally declared disaster area. You will actually need to provide a copy of the map indicating the affected areas. For homeownership applications, you will have to provide an MOU saying that 50% will be completed. And again, the exception to this is the federally declared disaster area, where we want you to provide a copy of the map. So I did get a few questions regarding climate resiliency before the webinar started, so I want to address those now. Can applicants get credit for a commitment to complete energy efficiency or weatherization repairs if it's not paid for from Federal Home Loan Bank funds? The answer to that, great question, but the answer to that is no. To receive credit for the commitment, it must be paid for by AHP funding. This is because we have to have control over that commitment. If something is completed or paid for by another program and their rules are followed, their rules may not align with our rules. So we need to make sure that our rules are followed. And then what type of documentation will you require for urban agriculture or food production? I believe I kind of covered this just a few minutes ago when I said either like an MOU or a letter from the contractor. But I do want to reiterate here that it may be hard for specific applications to complete some of the different options. So if you are a homeownership application, it might be kind of hard for you to say, we're going to do a community garden or a rooftop farm. So it's unlikely that you might be doing that specific scoring commitment. So the next I'm going to cover is district distribution. This has a 50% minimum requirement. And what this means is that you would get points in the application if the county you are located in has not received AHP funding in 2025, 2024, or 2023. So we are looking at the last 3 years. And if your county has not received funding, then you will be eligible for 5 points in the application. I will say this was a new commitment last year, and this is the number one commitment that was removed from applications. So people said that they qualified even though they didn't. I will note on this one, we also have an eligible county list that is available on our website. Residential economic diversity is also a hard one to understand. Most people think that this commitment means that you'll be working with underserved census tracts. It does not. That is not our definition. This particular commitment in layman's terms means that you have a low-income household in a high-income census tract. And how do you determine if it's a high-income census tract? And that is where the user guide comes in. We have a website that's listed, and we also have a new determination goal that will help you walk through this process. So there's a specific website. You'll go out to that website and look for the income of the census tract. And that income of the census tract needs to be equal to or above the income of the county or MSA. So for acceptable documentation, rental applications, you'll want to provide a copy of the map that is from that website. And for homeowner applications, you'll want to review that website to make sure that the census tracts you're working in are eligible, but you will provide an MOU at the time of application. I know we're going right up until 3 o'clock, so I apologize. It looks like I am going to go over a little bit, but hopefully stick in there with me if you can. Overnight homeless shelters, this requires a 90% commitment, and it's different than the housing for homeless commitment that we talked about earlier. And that's because there's no length of stay requirement for this particular commitment. So if the residents are staying less than 6 months or if they're staying overnight, then you can receive 5 points in the scoring for this. And for this one, again, there's no documentation required. It's based solely on the answer in the application. In district, very straightforward. 50% of the units must be in our district, which is Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, or Oklahoma. And then the last one we're going to cover today is qualified census tract. Please note that we do not determine these areas. They are determined by HUD. And we have created a guide that's on our website to help you walk through the eligibility process. For applications, you will provide a printout of the qualified census tract website. And this is specific to rental applications that validates the county that you're in, or the census tract that you're working in is eligible. For homeownership applications, it's very similar to the one that we just went over. You're going to review the website to ensure that census tracts that you're working in are eligible, but at the time of application, you're going to provide us with an MOU. So that is all of these scoring commitments. And before I kind of open up for additional comments or questions that we've had, I do want to go over just a few things. Please note that self-determination tool is out there and available to you for you to use. And I think it can be a great resource. Also, once the round opens on July 1st, we will not be able to discuss anything within your application except for true technical issues. If you cannot get a template to work or you can't get something to upload to the application, then we will help you and help answer any questions that you might have. But we are not going to be reviewing anything with your application after July 1st, regardless of whether or not you've already talked to us. And then lastly, as I mentioned last week, but I think it's worth mentioning again, home ownership projects. If you have an active project, you have to have at least 25% of the units completed if it was awarded in 2025, 50% of the units completed if it was awarded in 2024, and 75% of the units completed if it was awarded in 2023. Okay, I'm done with my spiel, and now I'm going to let Katie go ahead and ask me any questions that might have come through. And I do apologize that we've gone over at this point.
Perfect. Thanks, Dusty. Just a couple things before I start throwing questions out there. I did want to reiterate, I put this in the chat as well. A recording of this presentation as well as a copy of the slides will be posted to our public website. So if you need to hop off of here, that's totally fine. The recording will be posted out there within the next few days so you can catch up on anything that you miss. Also, I have had a few people put in the chat comments about a few minor issues within the self-score assessment tool. The biggest one being that if you enter points for the climate resiliency categories right now, it's not adding into the total number at the bottom. So we're going to get that fixed this afternoon. We'll get a new copy published for you all. So just make sure that you're watching for that new copy. Just make sure that it's adding up your points correctly for you. So we'll get that out as soon as we can to make sure you're getting your points added right. Okay, with that, I'm going to throw a couple of questions here. I just had a few come into the chat. The first one, so you mentioned for housing for homeless and special needs, right now we don't require any documentation at application. So in the application itself, there's no documentation requirement, but down the line, of course, they're going to have to document those. Is there a way that they can look at what kind of documentation we're going to ask for down the line?
Great question. Yes, There is a guide that's out there. It is on the resources section of our website. So on the left-hand side, if you are on the AHP website, once you're on AHP, then you look at the left-hand side and there's like application, disbursements, monitoring, go to resources, and there is a scoring commitment guide. That scoring commitment guide is solely for if you are awarded an application or a subsidy. Do not use that for anything in the application. But if you do want to know what's acceptable documentation, if you are awarded, that's a great resource for you.
All right. Next question. Do MOUs have an expiration date? If you have a current MOU, so not necessarily our template, but if you already have an MOU that you've signed with a provider previously and have those services already in place, are they allowed to use that MOU or does it expire at some point?
Great question. We can use an MOU that's dated within the current or previous calendar year. So we can go back to 2025. Please make sure, again, that any of the required items that we have in our MOU template are covered in your MOU that you've already set in place.
Okay, great. For adaptive reuse, are there any points available if less than 80% of the units are being converted from non-housing to housing? For example, if 20% of the units were being converted?
Unfortunately not. The minimum requirement for that is 80%.
Okay. For the energy efficient appliances, is there a certain number of appliances that you have to be able to qualify for that commitment?
There is not. You can be doing just refrigerators or something like that.
Okay, great. Um,
This might be a good place to notate. Sorry, Katie.
no, you're fine. Go for it.
This might be a good place to notate for energy efficient appliances. If you are a homeownership project, please make note that you do have to be doing some other type of rehabilitation in the house to be able to do the appliances. We don't want you to be doing just providing appliances to the household. That alone would not count.
All right. Thank you for that. If you don't mind, if you can go back to the underserved communities slide. I had a couple kind of questions surrounding this. Can you give us just a quick example of what it would look like to max out the points in this category?
Oh boy. Okay.
Just a quick one.
So let's say that you are doing a rental project and you have the whole project is geared towards elderly, right? So there's a lot of rental projects that do duplexes, and it's an elderly development. So in that instance, you can do greater than 75%, right? Because every single unit's going to be 55 or older. So there you've got 75%, and you get 5 points for that. And then let's say that the county that you're in is also rural. So the county is in one that's been determined, the Rook code, let's say, is 5. And if the Rook code is 5, then that means it's a rural household. And because all of the units are going to be located in this one county, again, that's greater than 75%. So you get, again, 5 points for that particular commitment. And then let's say that you are also in an area that has a large Native American population, then whatever the percentage of population you're going to be working with, you can get the associated points. So, Katie, I don't know if you said max out the points. I don't remember, but let's say the Native American households, let's say you're going to be working with at least like 25%, then you can get 1.75 points for that. If you're going to be maxing out, if it's a completely Native American project and you can max out and do greater than 75%, then you would get 5 points for that too. So that's maxing out then the scoring for that. There's a lot of various different ways that you can maximize the points for this particular scoring commitment.
That works perfect. Thanks, Dusty. Yeah, we had a question just surrounding how the points kind of work with the 10-point maximum and then the 15-point maximum. So from
Oh,
that
okay.
standpoint, if you want to expand on that any further, you are welcome to.
Okay. Yeah. Let me give an example real quick for that. So let's say you are a home ownership application and you're going to be doing down payment assistance. A lot of down payment assistant applications will do large units, pretty much because you can almost guarantee that 75% of the units you're going to be working with are going to be 3-bedroom or more. So you're going to be doing large units there. Let's say that you're also working in a rural area. Your county is designated with a rural Rook code of 5, let's say. So 75% there. So again, 5 points. And then so that is a 10-point maximum for that particular section. And then if you're going to also then be working with special needs, to max out the points for this particular category, you would have to do the 75% commitment to maximize the points. But let's say you're weary of doing that full 75% and you just want to do like 20%. So that would give you 11.75 points. So maybe you wouldn't necessarily go all the way to 15 on that one.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Dusty. Again, a clarification going back to the MOU question about when MOUs can be dated. You had mentioned that we will accept an MOU dated in the current or prior year. So we had a question, if we have MOUs like AHP template MOUs from last year's application, are those valid for this year?
Yes.
Okay. Short and sweet. Love it.
Yeah. The only thing that's been short and sweet today.
Okay. You mentioned this last week, but I believe it's more relevant for today. Can you remind us again the range, the scoring range of funded projects from last year?
Yes, thank you for that reminder. Great thing that we need to discuss. Points will always differ on any given year. So I would not say for sure that this will be applicable to this year. However, in the last prior years, the high has been around mid 70s, and the low to be awarded has been in the mid 60s. Prior to that, again, probably within a 5-year range here, the points did go down into the mid 50s to be awarded. So it's been a pretty large range over the last few years.
Perfect. Thank you. You mentioned earlier when we were talking about energy efficient appliances, you said that other work, if it's an owner-occupied rehabilitation project, other work needs to be also completed alongside the appliances. Is that true of the other categories, such as solar panels, things like that? If we installed solar panels, would we also have to do other work, etc.?
No, it is specific to appliances, mainly because we don't view just kind of installing appliances as rehabilitation, right? So for rehabilitation projects, make sure that you're just kind of doing something else in there.
Okay. I think last one I have right now. Again, if I missed anybody's questions, you are welcome to. There's a general AHP email inbox that's listed on our public website in the applications section or on Oh, yep, there's
Oh,
links here to the website that'll get you to that email. Feel free to submit those in and we'll make sure that we get those things taken care of. But the last one I see for the moment for the general population here, does the member financial participation commitment have to be a specific amount?
yes. For home ownership, it has to be at least 500. So if you have a member, let's say that you are doing a homeownership rehabilitation, then we want the member to either loan or donate at least $500. So, as an example, if they are donating money towards the actual rehabilitation, we want that to at least be $500. So the homeowner will be able to have some extra work done at that point. If they're going to be loaning money to the sponsor organization for a line of credit, we would like that also to be a minimum of $500. Chances are you're going to be doing a line of credit to pay for all of the rehab. So then it will be well over $500. So that is for homeownership applications. For rental applications, it needs to be 25% of the AHP subsidy awarded.
All right. I believe that is what I have right now. Again, please feel free, send us additional questions later. If you have anything, give us a call, use the general AHP email, and we will get back to you as quickly as we can. We'll also get that corrected self-score assessment tool out on the website as soon as possible.
Yes, we can look at those tools and guides as much as we want, and there it seems like there will always be something wrong. So I apologize for that. We will definitely get that fixed. Um, Thanks for sticking with me. Sorry that it went over. I was really hoping I would talk fast enough to get it within an hour, but I'm sorry I did not. So make sure again that you review the resources that's available on our website. We have so much more out there than what we've had in prior years. And again, reach out if you have questions. So that is today. That's all for today's training.